Hello and welcome to the second lesson in our historic environment topic. Now today we're going to be looking at what medicine was like just before the war and at the kind of injuries that medics faced on the Western Front. So let's start by thinking about surgery. Of course, surgery is going to be really important in the First World War. So, can you think of everything you already know about aseptic surgery in the 20th century? Can you also think about everything you currently know about X-rays? Now, in the environment topic, we have a new question type. We have a 4-mark question, and it will always be something along the lines of describe 2 features of. For example, it could be 2 features of X-rays, or 2 features of the trench system, 2 features of gangrene or trench foot. Now, what the exam board wants is 2 different features identified and extra detail to make those descriptions more precise. So, the best way to remember this is mean. Make a point, give an example. Make a second point, give another example. So you're finding 2 features and an extra bit of kind of descriptive nugget knowledge to, I suppose, pad it out a little bit. So you might have a question like this. Describe 2 features of aseptic surgery. Do you think you can have a go? Now, moving on to the new content we're going to be looking at this lesson. First thing we're going to do is put ourselves into the shoes of those medics at the start of World War I by looking at what medicine was like in 1914. Now, we're going to go and focus on 2 important aspects for the war. Firstly, X-rays, and secondly, blood transfusions. Now, we know since the work of Joseph Lister in the 1860s, surgery has improved dramatically in terms of tackling infection. It's moved from antiseptic surgery, which Lister began with, through to aseptic surgery. So, by the start of the 20th century, most operations were carried out using aseptic methods. So, while surgery was now effective in fighting infection, there were still many innovations it needed to bring it up to modern day surgery. One of the most important was the development of the X-ray. Now, the X-ray was developed almost entirely by accident by William Röntgen, a German physicist who, in 1895, was basically prattling around a bit, studying the effects of passing an electrical current through a glass tube that was covered in black paper. And this led to his discovery of the X-ray. Only a year later, in 1896, radiology, X-ray departments were starting to open up in British hospitals. X-ray was going to be really important in improving diagnosis, working out what the problem was. And although this was a great improvement, a great move forward, there were many problems with these early X-rays. Lots of the health risks just weren't really fully understood. The amount of radiation that was released from one of those early X-rays was about 1,500 times the amount released today. And think about today when you have an X-ray, the person X-raying you leaves the room because they don't want to be exposed to the harmful X-rays. So could potentially be quite harmful. In fact, patients could lose hair or even suffer burns. The X-ray equipment itself was also quite difficult to use. The glass tube used was very fragile and so could easily break. An X-ray took about 90 minutes and it was very difficult to move around because the X-ray machine was so large. Now, if we think about what problems that would cause on the Western Front, imagine soldiers having to wait 90 minutes for each X-ray. That would cause a huge queue given the number of casualties you're dealing with. And how on earth would you transport a fragile and extremely large instrument down on the Western Front among the mud and the shell holes or the craters? Extremely difficult. Now, another problem that surgeons would face down on the Western Front was the issue of blood loss. If they couldn't fix the issue of blood loss, thousands of soldiers would lose their lives. The problem of blood loss was first tackled by James Blundell, who in 1818 began his first experiments in human blood transfusion. Blundell developed many of the techniques and basic equipment needed to do human-to-human or person-to-person blood transfusion. So in that, the donor, the person giving the blood, was directly connected to the recipient, the person who was going to get the blood, via a tube. This was because they hadn't solved the problem of storing blood. Whenever blood was stored, it coagulated, it clotted. So they had to do blood transfusions person to person before World War I. They had made major advancements. For example, Karl Leinsteiner had discovered the existence of different blood groups, so you didn't give the wrong type of blood to the patient. However, until they sorted that storage issue, blood transfusions would be a real problem on the Western Front. So now let's take a look at some of the injuries medics would have met on the Western Front. Doctors would have needed to solve problems of hygiene, infection, blood loss, pain, disfigurement, all of this when there were a huge number of casualties who very quickly needed to be seen. Here's a great summary of some of the ways that soldiers were injured in World War I. Now let's first of all deal with one of the biggest killers in World War I, and that's the issue of infection. Now, trenches were incredibly unpleasant, unsanitary places. They lacked basic hygiene. There were a huge number of people living together in awful conditions, and they were open to the elements. So in the summer they were living among sewage, dead bodies. I mean, imagine the smell. Whilst in winter they had to contend with the elements that were giving rise to flooding and frostbite. Now, in this kind of environment, hygiene, aseptic surgery, it was near impossible. So most people who died during World War I actually died from infections of their wounds. Infection was made even more likely because of the soil in the region in which they were fighting. Now, this had previously been farming land, so it had been heavily fertilised, and all of that fertiliser meant there were loads of bacteria inside the soil. So when you were shot or a piece of shrapnel went into you, not only did the bullet itself go in, so did your clothing, dirt from everywhere around you, and all of that dirt and bacteria then festers and creates infection. One terrible infection soldiers suffered from was gas gangrene, which is an infection that produces gas inside gangrenous wounds. And when wounds were exposed to the soil, the presence of the bacteria made that infection more likely. Soldiers also got lots of tetanus, although they did manage to bring in some anti-tetanus injections by the end of 1914. The problem was with these infections, there was not yet antibiotics. That's World War II. That's Florian chain. So actually, this infection could very quickly spread through the body and could kill a person within a day. One of the main weapons that caused injuries to soldiers was high explosive shells. And these shells would explode and tear up into what we call shrapnel. and shrapnel was responsible for 58% of wounds. Bullet injuries made up about 39% of wounds. You'd usually really be hit in the legs or arms. That's where 60% of injuries were. At the start of the war, there was a high number of head injuries because the men were only issued with cloth caps. They didn't actually have proper helmets. So in 1915, the Brodie helmet, a steel helmet with a strap underneath, was introduced on the Western Front, and this managed to reduce head injuries by 80% just by introducing a new helmet. One of the most famous weapons of World War I, of course, is gas, and it was one of the most feared new weapons of the age. Now, whilst gas had really nasty effects, it could blind you, it would make you blister and suffocate, but in reality, not many people died from gas attacks. About 6,000 British soldiers died from gas attacks. By 1915, the British had introduced a form of gas mask, which became a lot more sophisticated over time. We'll go and have a look at those in a few lessons' time. The effect of all of these attacks could be extremely negative on a person's mental health. And what we now know as PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, occurred within the World War I trenches, but it wasn't given that name then. At the time, it was known as shell shock, and the British authorities didn't understand it and were extremely harsh on the men who suffered from it. At the beginning of the war, men were shot for cowardice for PTSD. Later on, they would be sent to some hospitals back in Britain, but it really was not understood what these men were going through. As well as all of these injuries from the actual experience of fighting, there were of course injuries from just the conditions themselves. For example, trench foot is a very famous condition whereby the feet are essentially rotting. They swell and they get infected, and it can ultimately lead to the loss of the foot. It needs to be amputated. And it's all because of the horrid wet conditions of the trenches. You also had trench fever, which was a fever transported through the lice that the men got in these unsanitary conditions. Now I've given you a basic run through of some of the various different injuries that men suffered from. Complete this table. Now we're going to focus in on gas attacks. Now there were 3 kinds of gas used throughout the war: chlorine, phosgene and mustard gas. Gas was first used in 1915 and the British Army was completely unprepared for it. However, as the war carried on, they managed to develop much better forms of gas mask to save their soldiers and prevent them from suffering the effect of gas. So the initial prevention was soaking cotton pads with urine and pressing them to your face so that you don't inhale the gas into your lungs. However, we can see here, this is an early form of gas mask where those cotton pads have been actually attached properly to a mask. Later on in the war, we get gas masks that we might recognise today. So it's time now to put your new knowledge to the test. Can you please complete this exam style question? Describe 2 features of wound treatment. Now remember, this is a 4-mark question. You'll only need 4 sentences. You need to meme. Make a point, give an example, make a point, give an example.